Did Trump buy into Putin's empty promises during the phone call, and how will this affect the course of the Russian-Ukrainian war? This and other topics we will discuss right now. My name is Irina Uzlova, and today with us is Yuri Rashkin, host of YouTube channel Rashkin Report and local elected official in Wisconsin. Yuri, hello, glad to see you. Thank you for joining us in these historical days.
Thank you for having me. It's another day when we're trying to figure out if there's actually any real news happening, but we'll get to the bottom of this. Let's do it.
Nothing new, it seems to me. The phone conversation between Trump and Putin lasted nearly 2 hours, making it the longest in the history of war negotiations between the USA and Russian presidents. It seems to me that Ukraine is on the menu, not at this negotiation table. Or maybe, am I wrong?
You're not wrong, but I think it's important to acknowledge that Putin essentially said no to what was proposed, because there was a 30-day unconditional ceasefire that was proposed by Ukraine. And Putin, in exchange, said that he was only willing to avoid strikes on energy infrastructure. And I have to tell you, Irina, that I was doing a live stream with on my channel, Rashkin Report, in Russian, and discussing, I could not believe the irony of reading that Putin proposed ending, that he will stop on strikes on energy infrastructure, while at the same time, my viewers in Ukraine are writing to me that they're being attacked by Shahed drones at the same time. So that means that Putin literally said that he will not attack energy infrastructure, but he will attack civilians, and he will attract this apartment buildings, essentially. So this is really not, I think, what was proposed in any way, shape, or form. But Donald Trump is so concerned about having good relations with Vladimir Putin that even waiting on the phone for whatever time he had to wait on the phone is not a problem, because I feel like if you're waiting for Vladimir Putin, are you really waiting? Or are you just kind of experiencing this sense of joy of upcoming meeting with your favorite person? Or at least it seems like that's how Donald Trump must feel, because he doesn't complain. That's not a problem. So many things are wrong in this world, especially, Joe Biden is responsible for everything. But Vladimir Putin, now there's a man that we can just totally wait for and have no problem. It's really strange, and it's very strange. I think Americans should just continue to think that this is strange, because it is. We have a president who is really just colluding with Russia. And I'm just discussing things that I see with my own eyes on the news. But I think if we discuss this kind of a possibility or perhaps reality, the question that my viewers in Ukraine want to have an answer to is, where is the ambulance? Where is police? Where's what's going on? I say, well, that's kind of going to be difficult right now, because there's no mental health requirements. And police is, run by the sheriff, who is appointed by the president. So, we're looking at a situation where we have to defeat this now at election time, which is a little strange if you think about the kind of damage being done. Therefore, we continue to hope and pray that the economy will send the message that the voters were not able to send in November, because we have a lot of problems, and lack of trust is ultimately what this is about. Because when Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin have a conversation and they can trust each other, we can't trust them. Nobody can trust Putin. Nobody can trust Trump. So this is a really fundamental challenge here. Is Donald Trump trying to sell Ukraine with Ukraine's permission or without Ukraine's permission, and with Ukraine's acquiescence or without Ukraine's acquiescence? And if American civil society can acquiesce easier because we have less at stake at this point, Ukraine's acquiescence and surrender to Russia and to Trump/Putin's demands will carry a far heavier toll and price. So it may not be a situation where acquiescence just to make nice will be acceptable. And that means that Donald Trump will say that he's ready for peace as he understands it, and Vladimir Putin is ready for peace as he understands it, and it is only Ukraine which is evidently not ready for peace as it, however it understands it. It doesn't really matter. And it's a challenge that I think Ukraine needs to understand in terms of time. This is a matter of time before situation will get worse. And whether a situation gets worse slowly or faster, I mean, even the idea of the conditions that are now set out by Putin essentially demand that Ukraine agree to end military aid from United States. See, so now Trump can turn off the spigot, but this time with Ukraine's permission. That is so much better. It's so much nicer and cleaner because it's not him that's turning off military aid. It's Ukraine that's saying, we agree to your demands. And of course, the question is whether Ukraine will agree to these demands or not. And I usually say that only Ukrainians can make that decision, which is what I believe. But it is my also impression that Ukrainians will not accept those terms because the list of terms, which also includes possibly the legalization or recognition of Crimea, is a non-starter with Ukrainians. It's a point of great contention that people in Russia and Ukraine would ask each other before the big invasion whether Crimea, whose was Crimea? Was Crimea Ukrainian or Russian? But now, if Donald Trump decides to recognize Crimea, that means that the whole world may call Crimea Ukrainian, but Donald Trump and Republican Party members who want to be in good standing will want to insist now that Crimea is actually Russian, which will allow us to have the same conversation in America as they do in Russia, which is who does Crimea belong to? If you so it makes these really big foreign issues really somehow personal to us in a way that really shouldn't be happening. This is politicization of our foreign policy. This is politicization of our national security and our defense. And that is just dreadful. But that is the outcome of this conversation, which, of course, as I understand Donald Trump said, or somebody characterized as moving us further away from World War III. And knowing the kind of characters and messages involved, I feel safe to say that the situation is moving a step closer to World War III with every conversation that Trump and Putin have, because they escalate their desires and their wishes list. And then if the world doesn't comply with this pretty tall order, then I guess it is the world that is at fault.
Once upon a time we discussed with you a dark test, and it seems to me that Crimea test is rather more realistic even in such cases. Really, this question are like big tests for different Russian leaders who are against Putin, but sometimes when you asked which Crimea is a peninsula, this question makes trouble to them. It seems to me that the biggest trouble and the biggest mistake of Donald Trump, and you mentioned about it, Yuri, too, that he trusts Putin. But it is a problem, and it can be our problem, but only Ukraine, and we are just ready for peace, for fair peace, not Russian Federation or the United States with Donald Trump. I mean, and our readiness destroys all agreements between Trump and Putin, yes?
Perhaps. I think that is a beautiful comparison with the Russian opposition and how they deal with the question of Crimea, because it does put them at ill ease that they're not able to really discuss this. Even Navalny, the legendary Navalny, had trouble with this issue of Crimea. So can we see that Crimea will divide the entire world into two? Ultimately, it's all about Crimea. Perhaps, I think an important part of the ideology of Trumpism and Putinism is denial. Denial of what reality is, that Crimea, of course, is Ukrainian, and denial of that fact. And you have to deny that if you want to be on good terms with Putin and now with Trump, essentially. And it's important to acknowledge that in the news story that brought us this highlight that he's talking about it, it's been mentioned that he's been saying this for years. So this is not even a new idea to him that Crimea is Russian. So he's always been, so for those that would decide based on that question, I think the answer has been pretty clear on that one for years as well. But that's okay. People, sometimes people say, why didn't somebody tell this to me before the election? I don't know. I mean, did you ask? I mean, it's like really available information is there. It's cited from just old articles. But, people have this kind of like, oh, had I only known. Well, you know what? That's how it works. And in the meantime, I can only hope that we're going to limit this question to hypothetical things for America, like Crimea, instead of like Alaska. Who's Alaska? Is it Russian or is it American? Because, Donald Trump / Vladimir Putin, I don't know, Elon Musk, think that maybe Alaska was unfairly purchased. And, there's some kind of a deal that has to be worked out, and just let's give, who knows? Because, and then we'll be denying something or other involved with that process again. It's the tactics never change.
Yes, and you were right when after these telephone negotiations between Trump and Putin, almost all Ukraine, half Ukraine became red, really. We heard rapid and we heard explosives in Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine. So when Putin breaks all agreements, how will Donald Trump act in such a case?
I think it's pretty clear that he will not blame Vladimir Putin. I think it's pretty clear that he will find somebody else to blame. It's not going to be himself. It's going to be whoever was there before him, whatever it was the past manager of this hotel was. Joe Biden is the one at fault because he was the last one in charge. This is why, on one hand, this is the question that Vladimir Zelensky asked on one of our, I feel it is 2 national days of shame, February 28th, when at the White House, Zelensky asked the question of Vice President Vance, saying, considering that Putin broke every agreement and every truth, how can you call that diplomacy? It's a hard question to answer, even, if you're not trying to be agitated. And if you're trying to be agitated, aggravated by things that this other person is likely to say, then it's a beautiful opportunity to be set off, because those types of rhetorical questions, because it's obvious you can't make deals with Vladimir Putin. It's very obvious. The answer is right there, because he breaks every deal that he makes. But Donald Trump doesn't feel that way. Why? We are left to our own devices and our own suggestions and our own thoughts to explain this. But I think that there's no good explanation. So I think that that's where we're going to be pedaling in that direction of how can anybody make a deal with Putin? And that means that when the deal cannot be reached by Ukrainians because they feel that they cannot, and by the way, it's important to acknowledge already that Zelensky is being blamed in the mainstream American media. Politico is saying that Zelensky may not consider this as an agreement worth signing. And I think it's important to acknowledge that it's Ukrainian people that would not consider this agreement acceptable. It's a minor detail, but I think it is worth noting, because it sounds like with Ukraine, if you have a president who signs an agreement that people don't support, then they go out and it's called the Maidan. And so we all know, of course, that would be terrible for the country, especially a country at war. But it's pretty clear that Zelensky can only sign an agreement that his people will support, because he's not a dictator. And that's what we're going to see. And we're going to see somehow, one way or another, Well, Zelensky has been, a very brave, ambitious actor, politician. We'll see how he acts his way out of this situation. But there's nothing good that is being set up for Ukraine here, and it's just a question of how Ukraine will choose. I think there's a good lesson there in the diplomatic efforts in Saudi Arabia from a Ukrainian delegation, which was able to succeed in a sense of restoring aid from the United States. That was, of course, approved by that other previous guy, the other guy before Donald Trump. That other guy. And so the restoring of that aid, I think that's really a victory and accomplishment for Ukrainian diplomacy. But of course, it's a really an uneven, unfair fight. Still, I have a lot of faith, for lack of other things, in Europe. Because it seems like as United States is experiencing something that could grow into a big economic event, and even defense industries are more interested in looking at Europe and relocating and orders being placed more in Europe than in the United States, as is apparently the trend these days. I think Europe is showing a tremendous amount of potential. Sometimes it's potential by comparison, but in other ways it's potential by need. I think there's a huge need for European potential to be realized right now, and I can only hope that there is political will and there is an understanding of the crisis that the whole planet really is in. I'm pretty sure the understanding is there, of course, because, understanding is the easiest thing to do. I just hope we're going to see some really good action, not just conversations between Trump and Putin, but also action and response from Europe, which really all of these conversations are leaving outside the room where it happened, because we're having this conversation about Ukraine and Europe, where neither Ukraine nor Europe are invited. And it reminds us of the realism versus reality. Realism, which means that, of course, America has so much impact and influence over Ukraine. Without American help, Ukraine's going to struggle mightily. It's not going to last without Ukrainian help. In fact, Donald Trump's been told that many, many times. I'm sure probably at some point, more than once, by President Zelensky, among others, that American help is so vital to Ukraine's survival and victory. So that means that he can feel that perhaps he controls the fate of Ukraine. Or perhaps Europe has a much bigger hand to play here. And when Donald Trump says that Ukraine has no cards, that Zelensky has no cards, well, I think that Ukraine has a whole other hand, and it's called Europe. And so I think that there's a lot of potential in that relationship that we're just going to see materialize now, because it's enough of us discussing these conversations between these two, rulers of the world wannabes.
Yes, we see that Europe is a reliable partner, more reliable than USA with Donald Trump. But Yuri, can you help me understand how step by step we must build our further cooperation and communication between Trump's administration and Ukraine these days?
Well, that's, I guess I wouldn't talk about values. I wouldn't talk about democratic values, because I think that's just a bad word now. I think the direction now lies in terms of compliments. Perhaps Vladimir Zelensky would like to nominate Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin for Nobel Peace Prize. It's that kind of a over-the-top praise that will not occur to perhaps a sane person that is required and needed at this moment. It calls for big gestures. I think perhaps Ukraine would like to join the United States as the 51st state. Canada then could be in line to become 52nd, and then Ukraine could be 51st. Then Russia couldn't have it. Because if Russia can't, because otherwise we'll look at spheres of influence, and Ukraine is clearly in Russia's neighborhood. But if Ukraine can become a part of, or maybe China, I think China is now looking very promising and much more solid than the United States.
Really?
you know, it's a crazy world, but, you know, they're just communists. You know, I mean, at least they're consistent. It's a crazy world, and it makes me think of, you know, the terrible situation that so many people were in 1930s and 1940s and 50s and during Cold War, where they were trying to figure out where it was better to be. And we saw people who were running from persecution from Soviet Union to America, from America to Soviet Union. It's the world that we were hoping to have left behind. We were hoping that after World War II, we were going to be living in the world followed by rules and order and agreements. But it turned out that those things is what women and minorities use to like defend their rights. Because reality is, it's just a strength thing. If you have a big stick, if you can be America and you can look at Denmark and say, I am so much bigger than you, and be, you know, Nelson Muntz to Denmark, then I guess that means that we can get this, that, or the other. But realism clashes into reality, and reality is that these systems are built on trust. And when there is no trust, it collapses so fast. And I think America is not a dictatorship, is a free country. Therefore, it is more vulnerable to those kinds of impacts that attack a democratic society, such as trust. Because, of course, what trust can there be in Russia? They're not being held together by trust. They're being held together by sticks. And that's a different value system. Yes. So I think that realism and reality are coming together, and it's impossible to prove to Donald Trump that reality exists outside of his vision of it. And it's hard to argue with him to a point, because he made it to be, you know, president of the United States. That's pretty darn impressive for anyone. But I guess sometimes God punishes people by granting their wishes.
Yuri, thank you very much. We'll see. Thank you for your position and for your clever thoughts. See you next week. Take care.
Take care. Thank you.
Yuri Rashkin.